Say what you will about the attempted eye gouging and the accidental murder, Aemond Targaryen is one of the more sympathetic and relatable characters in House of the Dragon. That may sound far-fetched to some of you, but just hear me out for a moment. As always, spoilers beware, and let's get into the video. Who is Aemond Targaryen? Aemond Targaryen is the third child and second son of King Viserys and Queen Alicent. He's a prince and a piece of the Targaryen royal family, but he isn't always treated like it because he doesn't have a dragon. Though that later changes when he claims Vhagar, the oldest and largest dragon alive. But instead of being praised by his family for such an accomplishment, he's challenged by them, and the ensuing fight results in the loss of his eye, the further sowing of division between his family, and his constant need for improvement in the death of his kin. At the start of it all, Aemond was just a boy who wanted to be accepted, and now he's the worst kind of criminal in Westeros, a kinslayer. So one has to ask, why? In any other story, Aemond would be viewed as the hero. When Aemond is introduced, he's easily a character many would root for. He's a prince, a second son in the Game of Thrones universe. Second sons don't have a lot going for them in terms of inheritance and politics. An example of this is Daemon, the younger brother to King Viserys, who Aemond starts to emulate as he gets older. Daemon is a prince with nothing to his name. He has no lands, no titles, just a dragon and a sword. All the power he has in the form of politics comes from his brother, his first wife Rhaea, and once they're gone, that power comes from Rhaenyra. Another example could be Tyrion from Game of Thrones, another second son constantly pushed aside in favor for his older brother because of his disability. As a result, he has to find a way to compensate for what he lacks, which is something we also see in Aemond down the road. Like Daemon and Tyrion, Aemond doesn't have much going for him, and is constantly pushed aside and put down because he lacks the cornerstone of being a Targaryen, a dragon. For him, that may as well be more of a disability than the eye he ends up losing. It's especially terrible when you consider how the people view Targaryens as closer to gods than men. Dragons set them apart, and without them, he's just like everyone else. And it's even worse when you consider how Jace and Luke are bastards. There's a great stigma around bastards, and Aemond is taught to hate them because of that. In his eyes, they aren't true Targaryens because of the way they were born. Yet, they have dragons, and he doesn't. So if a bastard is less than a man, but has a dragon, what does that make him? Already at such a young age, he has to contemplate who he is and what place he has in the world, all the while being taunted by his family for something he had no control over. Even so, Aemond wants to be accepted, to prove himself, and even puts himself in danger to do just that, and it's something that I myself and many others can identify with. Wanting to fit in, but constantly reminded that you aren't the same and that you don't belong no matter what you do. And with Aemond, it's not just some kids from school or people at work, it's his family. The people who come from the same place he does, and yet they treat him like a foreigner. Even his own mother doesn't understand the pain he's in until he has to spell it out for her. The weight on his shoulders isn't something a child should bear. The idea that his family legacy is what defines him, and if he can't live up to that, then what's the point? It's similar to what his brother Aegon goes through, but in a different way. But we'll talk more about that in his video. It's for the reasons I mentioned above that I just can't help but root for Aemond once he claims Vhagar. With everything he endured and went through, it felt so well deserved. It's a moment I imagined for myself when I was younger, and I'm sure others have too. Maybe not riding a giant dragon, but a moment of absolute grandeur where nothing and no one can take you down. I'm sure plenty of people, even in our adult lives, still imagine stuff like that. But I digress. I like to think that when Aemond first gets into Vhagar's saddle and she starts to fly and he almost falls off, it's actually her way of testing him, basically saying that if he can hold on, 1, he won't be dead, and 2, he'll have earned his place as her rider. And it's exactly because of this feeling of triumph that he achieves from successfully riding Vhagar that he walks into that cave so confidently and barely gives a second thought to his cousins and nephews. Jace and Luke, along with his brother, have been constantly putting him down for not having a dragon, and now he has the largest one alive. It's like being made fun of for not having a car, then showing up with a Lamborghini the next day. Under normal circumstances, Aemond would be praised for claiming the greatest dragon alive, but these aren't normal circumstances. He ends up getting into a dispute with his cousin Rhaena about who Vhagar really belonged to, and this is where most people fall away from Aemond because he's gone from the sympathetic child to a bully, but that isn't necessarily the case. Rhaena says he stole her mother's dragon, but that's not true. A dragon is not a title or a piece of land that you inherit from your parents once they die. We're shown firsthand just how intelligent they are in the previous episode when Vhagar refuses to burn Laena, but ultimately gives in because of the bond between dragon and rider. She can feel the pain she's in, so she relents. We even see it again later on, how Vhagar disobeys Aemond in the final episode. As a dragon queen once said, a dragon is not a slave. They choose their riders as much as the riders choose them. And if Rhaena had claimed Vhagar and she set off in a similar way as she had with Aemond, it's entirely possible that she could have just fallen off and they'd have to bury mother and child within days of each other. Or maybe Vhagar would have taken it easy on Laena's daughter and the whole fight wouldn't have happened anyway. But either way, Rhaena's argument holds no merit besides her own childish entitlement, but it's still understandable why she reacts this way. After all, she's grown up with Vhagar, probably ridden on her with Laena. It's only ever been her mother's dragon. So when Aemond claims her, it's also like he claimed a piece of their mother as well. And I can sympathize with her. But calling him a thief is out of line. As I said before, a dragon is not something passed down to you from your parents. And even if they were, Aemond technically had equal, if not more, right to Vhagar than Rhaena did. Before, Vhagar didn't belong to Laena. It belonged to Balon, the father of Viserys and Daemon. And because older children take precedence over the younger, Vhagar would fall to Viserys and his family. And with both of his older siblings already bound to dragons and his father refusing to ride one, Vhagar by all means would have belonged to him, because he is the child of the elder son, not to mention the king. But I digress. A fight ensues, and this is where I have to give props to the showrunners because this scene was so entertaining. There are so many shows with grown men and women wielding magic and swords that will never come close to this, so I just have to tip my hat real quick. But back to my point, a lot of people see Aemond as the aggressor in this fight, but he isn't. Yeah, he talks trash, but a fair amount of people would if they've been constantly ridiculed by their family and then they suddenly came into possession of nuclear launch codes. For once in his life, he's the one with all the cards to play. He doesn't need them to accept him or to prove himself to them. He doesn't even need to tolerate them because he's better than them. And yeah, it's a twisted way of thinking. You shouldn't throw away your decency for the sake of your confidence, but even so, he didn't throw the first punch. He tells Rhaena that a pig would suit her, giving her what he got from the strong boys. She charges him, and even then, he doesn't hit her, just pushes her aside. Then Baela punches him, and to no one's surprise, he punches her back. The girls start this fight, and Aemond defends himself, and I don't know why people find that so shocking. From Aemond's point of view, they just attacked him for no reason. Yeah, he was a jerk, but they were already wound up to begin with. And I'm convinced that even if Aemond had apologized to Rhaena, she still would have lunged at him because of what Vhagar meant to her. And I can't help but find this ordeal, as entertaining as it was, really sad, because Aemond and Rhaena are the same. They come from the same family, where having a dragon means almost everything. They both feel like they're lacking, overlooked by their parents, and having to live up to this grand legacy, and yet are unable to. In another world, this is perhaps something that would have brought them together instead of torn them apart. Maybe if that connection had happened, he wouldn't have taken Vhagar, or the fight wouldn't have gotten so bad at least. But it does, and Aemond loses his eye because of it. It's brutal, and yet people actually say he deserved this, but if you ask me, he didn't. What child deserves to lose an eye? We already established that he didn't steal Vhagar. He couldn't have. And if your mind is wandering to the death threats he made to the strong boys, I don't think he actually meant them. It was just something he was saying to get them to leave him alone. All attacked it to make them afraid, but people only seem to take it at face value as if he was truly going to bash in their skulls or feed them to Vhagar. The threats were hollow, and sometimes kids, even adults, say things they don't understand the full gravity of. But if anyone was really out for blood here, it was Jace, and a lot of people seem to miss that in the heat of the moment. Jace is the one that pulls out the knife, and it's not in defense of his little brother. He only pulls out the knife because he gets angry. Angry because Aemond called him a bastard.
Doesn't know, does he? Oh, strong.
And then he lunges at him, trying to stab and slash him. He is the one who truly escalated the fight. Not Aemond because he grabbed a rock. It was Jace, and it wasn't to protect his family. And everyone is so caught up in how terrible Aemond is, no one stops to consider that this could have gone really bad. What if Jace had actually killed him? What if Aemond was too slow in dropping Luke and got stabbed by that first thrust? How are you going to defend that? How are you going to tell Alicent, yeah, I killed your son because he called me a bastard? How are you going to sweep that under the rug and let that go? There would be no peace between the families. Say what you want, but it doesn't matter what he said or what dragon he claimed, he doesn't deserve to die. But this is just another example of how kids don't think things through, with Jace lashing out, with Luke doing the very same and slashing out Aemond's eye. even though that probably wasn't his intention. He was just trying to defend himself against this threat he perceived. And this one act sets the stage for the rest of his character, accompanied with the fact that his father doesn't care when he sees him injured. Time and time again, Viserys shows favoritism he has for Rhaenyra and her side of the family. It's made clear by the way he instantly shifts his anger from the Kingsguard for not protecting his children to Aemond for spreading lies. You can see the moment where the innocence leaves his eye as his father makes it clear who he cares about more. His own son. His legitimate child is missing an eye. He'll be visually impaired for the rest of his life. And yet he shows more concern for rumors he dispels every other day than the damage his child has suffered. Once more, he's put down by his family, and not just anyone, but his father, who basically tells him that what happened to him doesn't matter because they're family. And that's not going to fly in real life, because even if you're family, things like that don't just get swept under the rug. It's because they're family that they need to be held responsible. All Viserys wants to do is bury the problem, as he always does. But as Alicent says, that is insufficient. And she's the only one who seems willing to do something about this injustice. Yeah, sure, cutting Lucerys' eye out may have been a bit much, but it's better than just telling everyone to get over it. It's this lack of action and clear favoritism, the failures of his father, that molds Aemond into the young man we see later on. He's ruthless and cunning, delighting in the chaos he brings. He's finally grown into himself, that villain most people believed he was in that cave. Despite missing his eye, he's become great in his own right. Or rather, he's great because he lost his eye. Like Tyrion, who was born a dwarf, he had to find different ways to make himself tall. And that was with knowledge. Because Aemond is missing his eye, he works twice as hard, taking into account everything he sees so he doesn't miss a moment. It's why he notices Jace and Luke before his eye even lands on them. Aemond's gone from being the overlooked to being the overseer. I won't be surprised if he has become this way because of the way he lost his eye. He was so focused that he didn't see Luke grab the knife or Jace pick up the sand. It was that one oversight that cost him a piece of his vision, and he probably vowed never to let that happen again. He kind of reminds me of Bloodraven, who was also a Targaryen who had his eye cut out by one of his relatives. But despite missing it, he was said to have had 1,000 eyes in one. He knew everything that was going on in the kingdoms. Very few escaped his sight, and people feared him because of it. Aemond has harbored a deep hate for his nephews all these years, mainly Lucerys for cutting out his eye. It's surprising to me how many people say he should just get over it because what happened was a fair exchange. But forgive me for saying that is absolutely stupid. Losing a part of yourself physically or mentally is not something you just get over because you say it's fine. Especially when the source of your suffering is such a consistent one. When he was bullied as a child, it was Lucerys who brought out the pig. When his eye was cut out, it was Lucerys who held the knife. His father sided with the strong boys, and by default, Lucerys over him. Every moment where Aemond felt alone and helpless, Lucerys seemed to be the main contributing factor. It's one thing to say words and laugh, but it's another thing to bring in the pig to hold the knife. It's why his eye is always on him. And you all should know by now that words in the Game of Thrones universe mean nothing. Just because Aemond said it was fair doesn't mean he believed that. He saw how the tension was building that night, and it looked as if they were all going to go to war right there. So Aemond does the smart thing and puts his own feelings aside for the sake of his family, for his mother. Kind of like Alicent. She suffered for years, but people surmised that it's fine because she came into great power, and people assumed the same for Aemond because of Vhagar. But often those with great power are those who are most vulnerable. There's a debt, and the longer it goes unpaid, the more Aemond's anger builds. It's surprising to me how no one stops to consider just how traumatizing this must have been for Aemond. It's as if they just forget that he was a kid too when this all happened. Just because he made some empty threats and picked up a rock, he lost his eye for no reason, and yet Jace and Luke are so innocent and he deserved it. It's like listening to Rhaenyra defending her son with such obvious lies. Aemond is her younger brother, and her son cut out his eye, and yet instead she's more concerned with a name, a rumor that at worst could get her disinherited and exiled. And immediately she goes into victim mode. Her sons were the ones who helped start the fight. Her sons are the ones who pulled out the knife and attacked him. Her sons are bastards. That's the truth, and yet she continues to lie. And I understand that she has no choice. She has to protect her family. She has to protect her status. I understand it. But Aemond is also her family. And instead of taking responsibility for her children, she insists that her brother is wrong, suggesting that he be sharply questioned. And in Westeros, to be sharply questioned means to be tortured. And once again, she escapes without consequences. Once again, he's shown that his well-being comes second to another. That alone is traumatizing. losing something you can never get back, and your family doesn't seem to care. Despite his terrifying demeanor, he is not just some bloodthirsty teenager. No, he's living proof that actions have consequences. They must have consequences. He was bullied for not having a dragon, and as a result, he claims one so great he can never be made fun of again. He lost his eye, and so he trained so diligently that no blade can touch him. He was overlooked by his father, so when he enters a room, you always take notice. It's because of this unfair treatment given on Driftmark that he wants so desperately for Lucerys' eye. He may have broken his nose, but those things can be reset and repaired. An eye cannot grow back. He has to bear that for the rest of his life, always compensating, always working, always pushing so he can be better, always reminded of what he lost and who did it. And yet, Lucerys is allowed to laugh. He's allowed to look back on all those memories and smile, those memories that caused Aemond so much pain. He shows no remorse, doesn't even make an attempt to reconcile. He looks at his missing eye and does nothing, says nothing, but he laughs at the pig. It's no wonder he jumps into action when Luke laughs at the pig. When Luke laughs at the pig, it's also like he's laughing at Aemond as well, like he did when they were kids. But they aren't kids anymore, and he wants them to know that. It's why he antagonizes them and provokes them. He lands blows without having to draw a sword or throw a punch. Seeing them weak and helpless, just like he was, is sweeter than honey. He's kind of like Daemon, using his words to eke out a reaction, like when he insults Otto in the first episode. I like to think that that's why Daemon smiles when he stares Aemond down, because the whole dinner scenario is something straight out of his own book. I mean, episodes before, he laughs at Daemon for speaking on the purity of Valyrian blood, and then Aemond mocks the strong boys who are masquerading as Valyrians themselves with veiled words. In another life, Aemond and Daemon would have made probably a great father-son duo, just terrorizing the realm. But back to my point. It's those old feelings that causes him to chase Lucerys into the storm. He could give a damn about Aegon being king. Lucerys has gone his whole life without ever being held accountable for what happened to him in that cave. Always riding the coattails of his mother and grandfather, but they aren't here to help him now. So when Lucerys tries to slip away again, Aemond won't let him. He uses Vhagar to claw and snap at him, each time narrowly and cleverly missing the mark, and Lucerys begins to panic, and Aemond laps it up. This is what he wants. Fear, humiliation, helplessness, the same as he felt when he was taunted for not having a dragon, the way he felt in that cave when he was ganged up on and lost his eye, when his father failed him. But despite his desire for pain, he's still not a monster. When Vhagar loses control and kills Lucerys, you can see the pure shock and terror on his face, the regret, the weight of what he's done. This is probably the first time he's ever killed anyone, and it was his own nephew. Now, for the first time in years, we see that child, that innocence that died on Driftmark. And this one look sums up who Aemond is. A kid. And yeah, he's a teenager. He's still a kid by all means, but what I mean is Aemond is still that little boy in that tunnel. The boy who just wanted to be accepted. The boy who was overlooked. The boy who lost his eye. It's not something he was able to just get over like some people believe. Our past may not define us, but they do mold us. Those moments where we embarrass ourselves. Those moments where we slip up. Those painful moments that we try to bury but can't. And for someone like Aemond, who had to constantly fend for himself against his own family, that was exceedingly hard to do. So it doesn't surprise me that he tried to give back a piece of what he got. Most people would. And it's really sad because, as understandable as this pain is, no one is going to believe him. When he gets back to King's Landing and the truth comes out, who's actually going to believe it was an accident? Kinslaying is one of the worst crimes in Westeros, and Aemond is most likely going to be branded a monster. And why wouldn't he be? Everyone knows Lucerys cut out his eye. Everyone knows he hates him. Lord Boros and his men saw him try to attack him, and more than likely saw him take Vhagar after him. And it's supposed to just be coincidence that the prince never made it back to Dragonstone? Aemond, who comes from a family of dragon riders and has been riding the largest dragon in the world since childhood, just happened to lose control and kill the guy who cut out his eye? Yeah, sure. No one is going to believe that, and now Aemond has to face consequences of his own. The narrative that forms as a result of his actions. And looking back on it now, Aemond is kind of similar to Jaime in this regard. Like Aemond, Jaime was also given a name. He committed a serious crime, and that was regicide. As such, he was called the kinslayer for killing King Aerys. And people think he only did it for selfish reasons, but that's not the case. He saved their lives, and they'll never know. But with Aemond, it's different. What he did was an accident, and as such, he'll be labeled a kinslayer, an equally grievous offense as being a kingslayer. He'll be given two choices: continue to deny it and tell a truth that no one will believe, or become the monster they all see him as. To become Aemond the Kinslayer.